want to talk to you about how to become a world-class leader. Several years ago, I was traveling internationally speaking, and I was in Thailand, and I was answering questions to the news reporter when I landed in that country. And they asked me what it was like to be the world's #1 leadership guru. And I looked at them and I said, well, I don't know. And it's there that they told me that it had just been announced that I was the #1 leadership guru in the world. In fact, they knew it before I knew it. I didn't even know that this had happened. And so that day I realized that, wow, if I'm the nation's or the world's #1 leadership guru, this has been a good journey for me. So I asked myself, well, how did I achieve that? If I really am, then how did I get to that position? How did I become the world's #1 leadership guru? Well, I'm going to talk to you about how to do this. I'm going to talk to you right now about how you can become a world-class leader. So these are my practical steps to you as I, your friend, John Maxwell, mentor you. Number 1, start with yourself. Don't start with the world. Don't even start with your team. Start with yourself. It's kind of like this. The #1 leadership challenge I have is not leading others. The #1 leadership challenge I have is leading me. You see, it's easy for me to tell you what to do, but for me to do it myself, now that's a whole different story. That's a whole different level. And so I don't want you to miss this because it's so important for me that you start by leading yourself. In other words, you start by being the example for your team because your team is going to be like you. So if you develop good leadership qualities, if you develop good leadership practices in your life, guess what? Your team will follow. I've learned that it's easier to tell other people what to do than to do it myself. I've learned that I'm my #1 leadership challenge. So when John Maxwell, who's become the world's #1 leadership guru, where does he start? Not with the world, not with even my team. I start with myself. I make sure that I'm the example I want my team to see so I can truly say to them, follow me. The second step in becoming a world-class leader is to start for the right reasons. Often I'll talk to young leaders and they say, well, I want to be a leader. And I always ask them the question, why do you want to be a leader? And I'm always interested in their answer. Sometimes people will say, well, I want to become a leader because I want to be in control and I want to be first and I want people to look up to me. And when they begin to talk about selfish reasons for wanting to be a leader, well, I'll make more money or I'll have a higher position or I'll be the boss, I know immediately that they're in trouble because you don't lead for what it benefits you. The only reason to lead is to benefit others. Leadership is all about other people. It's not about you. It's not about me. And so what I've realized is that the people who are successful in the long run leading is because they became a leader to add value to the people around them. Again, that's the question. When I meet with presidents of countries, in fact, as I'm teaching you today, just in a couple of days, I'll be in another country and I'll be meeting with the president. In fact, I'll be talking to Congress in that country. I'll be talking to the Supreme Court. I'll be talking to many leaders. I've been going to be on nationwide television. And when I'm alone with like the president of a country and it's just the two of us, I always look at them and I ask them this question, since you're the president of the country, since you're the leader of the country, who's getting the most benefit, your people or you? You see, the only reason to lead is to give the people the benefit. The only reason for you and me to lead is to add value to others. That is essential. You don't want to miss it. So how do you become a world-class leader? Start with yourself. Number 2, start for the right reason to add value to people. Number 3, just start small. I love this. Mass movements don't begin with a mass. They begin with a few people. A few people who just are passionate and committed to make a difference in the people's lives and those around them. And so when you start for the right reason, you're starting to benefit again and help others and make a difference in their life. When you start small, you're realizing that if you can't lead a few, you'll never be able to lead many. So when sometimes people say, well, I want to lead a big team, I say, well, honestly, can you lead a small team? Can you lead 2 or 3? If you can lead 2 or 3, maybe you can lead 20 or 30. Maybe at a time you can lead 200 or 300. Maybe someday 2,000 or 3,000. But you start small. You don't start big. Mother Teresa was asked one time, how do you feed the world? I love her answer. She said, start with 1. How true, how simple, but how helpful. Mother Teresa said, start with 1. If you can feed 1 well, guess what? You can go with 2 and then with 3. And as I say that, when people look at me as a world-class leader, literally 50 years ago, I started with 3 people. Just 3. And one of them was me and 2 others. I started small, but it's okay. If you can lead small well, you can lead medium well. Someday you'll be able to lead big well, but start small. The 4th thing I want to talk to you about, and this is so essential to becoming a world-class leader, is that you need to be consistent. You don't become a world-class leader by being inconsistent. You don't become a world-class leader by quitting. It's every day doing the right thing, the main thing. It's doing those everyday essentials that will make you very successful in your life. And believe me, at 74, I can tell you this is a fact. Consistency compounds. If you will keep doing the right thing every day, someday you're going to reap a huge return. It's kind of like, maybe to illustrate it, if there was this big boulder, big rock, and I wanted to break it, and I had like a sledgehammer, a big hammer to pound that rock. When I started, I would know that the first time I hit that sledgehammer on that rock, that there was not going to be anything that would be shown as making progress with that rock. It wouldn't crack. It would just be there. And so I keep pounding the rock. I keep pounding the rock. And for many times, I'm not seeing any progress. I'm not seeing any kind of positive results of all that pounding. But, if I just keep pounding the rock, you know what happens? Eventually, all of a sudden, the rock cracks and then it breaks. Now, the day I hit that sledgehammer on that rock and it broke, would everybody say, oh my gosh, that was the magic hit. That one right there, that was the one that broke the rock. No. Every hit was magic. Maybe hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of hits. I don't know. But every hit was magic because it was going towards the specific goal of breaking that rock. What I want you to do is this. Consistency compounds. Recently, they told me that I've written more leadership material than any person that has ever lived in the history of the world. Now, if that's true, people would ask, John, how have you written more leadership material than any person that's ever lived in the history of the world? It's very simple. I write every day. Every day, I'm writing. That compounds. After tens of thousands of days in my life, I'm now the number 1 leadership author as far as written material that the world has ever known. But how did I get there? Consistency. I write my books 1 word at a time. You live your life 1 day at a time, but be consistent. If you'll do those 4 things, you'll be a world-class leader. And that's the truth.
John has been doing the last week or so, he's been doing this lesson that is absolutely one of the best lessons I've heard in a long time. And I get to hear John quite often. And the lesson is simply this, podcast viewers, podcast listeners. It's called the Success Stabilizers. Success Stabilizers. Now, isn't it true that you're listening to this podcast today, you're viewing this podcast today because you want some success in your life? That's what we found. We found that over 90% of the people that interact with Maxwell Leadership, they come for inspiration and skills resources to become better. So chances are 9 out of 10 of you are tuning in today because you want to be inspired with something, some nugget that will help you be a little more effective, a little more successful in your leadership. And so John says, but then when we become successful, something happens. We don't keep success in a proper perspective as leaders. We begin to let success be a little more inflated in its value, or we let success be a finish line that doesn't propel us with that success into significance. Success is what happens to us. Significance is what happens through us. And so John's doing this incredible teaching called Success Stabilizers. Now, it's his lesson, so I'm going to let him teach it, but I'm going to give you 2, and then I'm going to give you the third one that's very apropos. It's very relevant to today's podcast. The first characteristic, or one of the things that really comes with success, is a bit of an ego. A bit of a swag, a little bit of a confidence to our step, right? I mean, Tracy, I see it.
Okay, I really hope that you are going to tune in and watch this on YouTube.
I gave some moves
Mark
there.
Just did. He kind of ventured into dancing almost.
Yes.
I'm not sure what that was, but I'm not sure it was ego, but it was a little bit of a dance. A swag was.
Podcast listeners, don't tune in because very quickly you're going to understand I have a face for radio and I have a voice for the mute button. So do not tune in.
But you've got dance moves that they've just got to see.
Yes. So it's this concept that, yeah, with a little bit of success, we get a little bit of an ego. We get a little bit of a confidence that if we're not careful, if it's not stabilized, we will allow that to become a detriment to our success rather than something that extends our success into significance. And so the stabilizer to ego is humility. We've got to constantly stay in this place of humility. That's why, Tracy, thank you for complimenting a while ago when I say John told me just yesterday, hey, Mark, such a great job on stage. Thank you very much. And I go, John, man, I don't know that I deserve this. I want to always, Patrick Lencioni, our friend, says that one of the key attributes of a great leader is humility. Humility, hunger, and a desire with skill sets and strengths. And I want to keep that humility. And John says that's a stabilizer to ego. He said, second thing that comes a lot of times with success is money. So another characteristic of success is we allow monetary things, money, bank accounts, growth, and nicer cars are things to indicate success. Well, money has a stabilizer in generosity. Don't show me how much money you have in your bank account. Don't show me your W-2 at the end of the year. Show me your giving statement. Because if you can continue to have this feeling of generosity, and by the way, a lack of money exposes generosity as well. I've met a lot of people that said, hey, when I make $1 million, I can't wait to give $100,000, $200,000 away. And I go, well, how much are you giving now? And when the answer is 0, I say, no, $1 million in the bank, $1 million of income is not going to make you more generous. It's going to make you more selfish. So a stabilizer to money is generosity. But then we go to the one, and I did teach a little bit of John's lesson. Still tune in because he's a lot better. But then we go to this stabilizer for another characteristic of success, and that is pride. There's a true, I believe, healthy pride. Something that really can make you and I thankful, appreciative, even respect the effort put into success. A sense of healthy pride. I certainly have that for my daughter, Macy, right now. She's just killing it in some areas that I'd love to have more podcast time to tell you all about. There's a healthy pride. I hope it's healthy that's there. But when you get success and you have this sense of pride in your accomplishments, you need a stabilizer. And that's where today's lesson comes in, Tracy, because the stabilizer to pride is gratitude. Is the sense that I don't stand here alone. I stand on the shoulders of those that's gone before me. I don't stand here because of my accomplishments. I stand here because Javon and Jake in the studio with me is making this podcast what it is. Just the other day, Tracy, I was on a flight coming back to Atlanta and somebody just kind of greeted me in like almost this, I know you, how are you doing? We had masks on as we do, still traveling and there was just this brightness in his eyes and I went, I think I might be supposed to know this person and anyway, we flew on and didn't say anything. Well, we get off the plane. I had a problem with my bag. And she came up. She said, hi, my name is Sarah. And you're Mark Cole. And I know this because I view the podcast. And I went, wow. And by the way, Sarah, it was so good to see you on that flight. I wish I had more time to hear your story. But I went, wow. That's because of Jake. It's because Jake showed up this morning. Mark, don't get so caught up that there's a visual representation of the podcast this somehow means that Tracy and I are the drivers of the podcast. I stand here today, I'm actually sitting, but I sit here in the studio today as you do, Tracy, able to communicate hopefully value to you on the podcast because an army of women and men. I sit in the seat of CEO in the organization because Linda Eggers, not John Maxwell, Linda Eggers saw and appreciated the value of my leadership and put in a good word to the big man. She's been John's assist. She's been on John's team for over 30 years. And when Linda speaks, everyone listens. And when Linda told John, you need to check this guy Mark out that's been on the team for about 3.5 years, John began to see opportunities for me to continue climbing in the area of success. I never want to forget. I want my success today to be stabilized with the gratitude to Linda Eggers, to Jake, to Javon. I want to always stay stabilized in any successful things that I experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that maybe if you're listening, sitting here in this chair, not in the same room with Mark, but feeling like we're in the same room.
Yeah.
And I always sit in this podcast and I take notes to myself. If you're watching, you see me looking down sometimes as Mark is talking because I'm learning right alongside of you. And I learn and I grow when Mark shares his application. And as he did, there were just a couple things that I want to share before we close out this podcast that really stood out to me that maybe will stand out to you as well. So I have been trying to practice what's in John's books, as Mark has, as many of you have listening in and watching on this podcast. But some of you, I'm sure, beginning, or maybe maybe this is gratitude is something that has been a sticking point for you, or an area you want to grow even more in. I know that generosity is something that I really pursue. I want to be known for generosity, and I would assume you probably do too, or gratitude. But 2 G words. I'm looking down because I wrote generosity. Let me just say, so if you're thinking that you want to pursue humility and generosity more, and whether or not that's just starting to put that more into your life, or something that you want to really cultivate and have more and more of that in your life, how you activate that more. John really hit on that in his in the notes. So I hope that you print those notes out. But I heard something one time that really stuck with me, and I've tried to apply it, and I'm going to share it with you. They said, forget what you've, keep a short account of the wrongs others have done to you. And that's on forgiveness, of course. But the flip side of that, what's applicable today, is it said, keep a short account of the rights that you've done, the right things you've done for others, the times when you've been generous. Because sometimes when you're generous with others, that you can tend to keep a running tally in the back of your head of maybe what people owe to you. So generosity can have this weird flip side of if you do something kind for someone, you can think, well, they owe me because I've done this for them and I've done that for them. So not only should we keep a short record of the wrongs people have done for us, but we should keep a short record. Part of being generous is keeping a short account, a short memory of the right things we've done and the generous things we've done for others. And then the other things that he highlighted, that John highlighted, was keeping a gratitude journal. You know, if you're somebody who struggles with maybe a grumpy attitude sometimes, or when we all hit lows in our lives, it's nice to have a gratitude journal that you can go to and open up and look at all the times, the things that you are so grateful for. When your brain is tempted, when your mind and your emotions are tempted to really focus on the things that you are struggling with, and when you go to those things that you're grateful for and you read through them and you look through them, it just buoys your spirits. It makes you feel better. It makes you remember the real things in your life, not just these temporal things that are just popping up right now, because we're all going to have hardships. But really keeping a gratitude journal is something that I think is we're way less apt to complain if we really train our brains and put in habits, healthy habits of gratitude into our life. And so I'll let you close it out, Mark, but I'm just wanting to help all of us to, the key takeaways for me from this podcast is, are we practicing what John has put into his books? That alone helps us to be more grateful people, because he is such a grateful person.
Hi, John Maxwell here. Welcome to Minute with Maxwell. I wrote a book entitled How Successful People Think. It's really helped literally millions of people. It's a bestseller. But I wanted to kind of tell you a story behind the book, and that is when my father and mother were celebrating their 50th anniversary, our entire family went to Hawaii for a week. And my father and I talked one night when everybody else went to bed, and I shared with him that he was such a good thinker and so positive in his thinking. And how did he become so positive? And what he told me that night was fairly life-changing to me. He said, John, I'm not naturally a positive person. He said, I'm kind of melancholic. And he said, honestly, if anything, I'm a little bit naturally bent to a little bit of negativism. But he said, when I was a young man in a little town in Ohio, he said, there weren't very many successful people, but I happened to do chores for one family that seemed to do very well. And he said, by the time I was a junior in high school, I came to the conclusion the only difference between that family and the rest of us that were quite poor was that they thought differently than the rest of us. And he said, from that time on, I spent a lot of time working intentionally on thinking, not only positively, but just thinking in ways that would add value to me and add value to others. And then he said the statement that just absolutely triggered and was the catalyst for the book, How Successful People Think. He said, John, the greatest gap between successful and unsuccessful people is the thinking gap. I'm not talking about IQ. I'm talking about successful people think differently than unsuccessful people. And because they think differently than unsuccessful people, it controls their behavior, which determines their life. That night after our conversation, I went to my hotel room, stayed up all night with a legal pad and my 4-color pen, and I began to put down the thoughts that just became the book on how successful people think. So when you read the book, and I can tell you, it is a life changer. I talk about 11 ways that successful people think that are different than unsuccessful people. When you read the book, I just wanted you to know the story behind the book. It's a good story. It's from my father to me and now to you. I wrote a book entitled How Successful People Think. In that book, I talk about 11 thinking patterns that successful people have that unsuccessful people do not engage in. And my father taught me that the greatest gap between successful and unsuccessful people is how people think. He's right. And one of the thinking patterns that I give in this book, How Successful People Think, is what I call sustained thinking. The ability to take a thought and stay with that thought longer than what most people do. Because when I have an immediate thought, it's never a great thought. It's just an immediate thought. But if I stay with it long enough, it has potential to mature and grow into a great thought. Let me just share with you an experiment that people have tried before, and that is, I don't know, get a group of 10 people in a room and say, I want you to think about this for an hour. I'll come back, give me your thought on the idea, come back, and they've thought about it for an hour, and so they've made the thought better for sure. But then randomly, just pick 5 people to leave the room, and the 5 that are remaining just say, now give 1 more hour of thinking upon this idea. Come back at the end of that hour, that thought has become better. It became better not because the people in the room got smarter. It became better because the people in the room stayed with the thought long enough to think it better and to build it and to create something that they hadn't had time in that first hour. Here's what I know. Your first thought is not going to be a great thought, but if you sustain that first thought, stay with it long enough, it will get better. Who knows? Someday it may even become great.
From leader follower to leader leader. And I'm really intrigued by today's topic. I know that this idea has come from Captain David Marquet in his book, Turn the Ship Around. And in that book, he was the captain of the USS Santa Fe, which was a nuclear submarine in the Navy. And I've heard you teach on this before. I love how you teach and facilitate teams and sessions with stories and analogies that kind of really bring the principles home. So I look forward to diving into this today.
Yeah, Captain Marquet has got a couple of really good pieces out about communicating in leadership and how communication matters. But this one was the idea that he took over the Santa Fe and couldn't get any rest. Everybody had to ask him questions. He realized they were really good, even at night, have to knock on his door to get responses from him about turning the ship or whatever. And he just was big on the fact that we're really good at leader follow. I think this is true for most of us.
So true.
Matter of fact, and when I'm coaching, I'll ask a group, a leader, I said, if I went behind you, left you here right now, and went and asked the people on your team, are you a leader? Who's a leader? Are you leaders? They would say, oh, no, the boss, he or she, that's the leader. They were thinking about it from a title, and that at a position is how they view that. Well, we teach that leadership is influence. And if you truly buy into the fact that leadership is influence, then you don't need a title. Everybody on your team should be thinking like a leader.
Right.
Thus, when Captain Marquet said he really thinks we're really good at leader-follower, but would you be better served if you operate in a leader-leader environment where you may be the leader with the title, but everybody's a leader with influence on the team? And should they be doing that? What's your thought about it? Would your whole team, if they thought of themselves as leader, would that be better for you or worse?
100% it'd be better. And I want people on my team that think with like an ownership mindset. Like, take this baby, run with it. It's your responsibility. Here's what your KPIs are. Here's what here's what you're going to be looked at and what the organization needs from you and to lead it. I also think right now, and I'm going to pose a question to you as we jump into more and more of the content here, but right now I've had people say, hey, what are you learning? Like, what are you really trying to work on right now in your leadership? And for me, it's interesting because my initial response is leading leaders. And then I go, so then we've talked about how I often think of the opposite of that. I go, so does that mean I've just been leading followers? Mm-hmm. So it's a mindset that I think we have to have at all times as looking at everybody on our team and how would we lead leaders or how would we lead our team, which, oh, by the way, because we believe that influence is leadership, they are leaders. And so as you begin thinking about this from a leader, I think it's an incredible kind of like paradigm shift that you have to go through and think about.
Well, Captain Marquet said in the book that he thought a top-down leader-follower is okay if you're measuring performance over the short run. That he even noticed that in the command of the Santa Fe, that leaders were rewarded for being indispensable and that they were being missed after they departed. He said it was in the Navy that if performance goes down, think about that, the captain, he's indispensable or she's indispensable on the ship and they're needed for everything, very much leader-follower, and they leave and performance crashes because people don't have anybody bossing them, telling them what to do. that was taken as a sign that they were a good leader is that they must have been really needed, not that they were effective in training the people properly. So Marquez said he really had to get into this, shifting the mindset of people that you need to be thinking on your own. You need to be acting like a leader, not like a follower. And so he needed to treat them like a leader. You know, one of the things he put in that was interesting was to find out how people think. He would say, instead of asking me, Captain, what should we do next? I want you to state what you think we should do next. So he introduced the Captain, I intend to. So if they said, you know,
I like that. That's good.
The seamen should know that where we are right now, that they're paying attention to their role, their job, they're the navigator or whatever, that we need to move the ship, the submarine 4 degrees to the starboard. They would say, Captain, I intend to direct the ship 4 degrees to the starboard. And Marquez would know that that's the right thing. He would just say, carry on. If they said, Captain, I intend to launch a nuclear weapon to see if the weapon systems work, he would say, tell me more, because that's not the right thing to do right now. So he could hear their thinking, but then he would not.
I like that.
He would say, tell me more. Then he would hear their thinking. Then he could coach their thinking. And he said, once you know how somebody thinks, you know where they're coming from, that he could actually get them thinking more like a leader. What would a leader do now? What should you be doing in your role? So I love this, Captain, I intend to. Instead of me telling you what to do, you tell me what you think you should do, and I'll either confirm or deny it.
That little segment right there is worth your entire 20 minutes of listening to this podcast, because as we're leading teams and as we're leading groups and individuals, you want to help them think differently. And but you got to first understand, how do they think? And by that illustration right there, that allowed him. And as leaders, we need to do a better job of that. And when you get into this leader model, it's really about things we've talked about around the 5 levels of leadership, being able to develop people and empower people at all levels so that they take ownership of it. Where you're taking the opportunity to coach and to mentor. I love the tell me more. Why are you thinking that? And so then you can dive in and coach them versus just giving them a directive. When you do that, there's no doubt. You and I know this. We've sensed it and felt it in teams and organizations that we worked with. When this is happening, there is a culture of trust, of collaboration, of energy that gets raised up. And so I agree with all of that. So now the question becomes, to those that are listening and those leaders and even us, well, how do we go about that then? How do we go about moving from the leader-follower to the leader-leader?
Well, I have a point of view on that.
I know you do. And tell me more about that, Perry. Tell me more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think first you start with developing a culture of leadership, and that you got to start teaching leadership is influence. You know, I was thinking as you're talking to now that we talk about the 5 levels being a common language of leadership. And when you start having this common language, that you're teaching people how to increase influence. And by the way, influence 360 is not just influence down to your follower team, it's influence across to your peer group, influence up to your leader. So are you in this culture of leadership? Are you infusing leadership into your team's thinking? We have a whole podcast on infusing leadership into your team's thinking, little small things you could do. And does every person on the team own their own personal development? So you can direct it in the direction of, we need to be thinking more like leaders. How do we grow as leaders? And maybe you could even hit on law of the lid. I think you hit that a couple of podcasts ago, but I think you meant, as you say that so well about being a lid lifter. Yeah. But that's, to me, is having this culture of leadership.
As a leader, you have to get to the point where you are continuing to develop yourself in a way that you're leading people and encouraging them to lead themselves, to be able to lift that lid, right? And when you do that, you're all of a sudden going to see a room of leaders. You're going to see people that now are thinking a little bit differently. You're going to understand how they're thinking. You're going to be able to lift the lid on how they're thinking. And all of that will just come hand in hand with that. The second point you have here for us is stop being the genius and become a genius maker. Obviously, this refers to Liz Wiseman in her book, The Multipliers, which is a great book, one of John's favorite books of hers. And so, man, don't keep providing all the answers. Don't rescue people out of something that they need to learn. One of the things that, we're doing right now in our leadership team, and Mark our CEO, Mark Cole, will often ask, and he'll be like, all right, so Chris, and you got to be paying attention because you never know. So I haven't been sleeping in any of our meetings. Like, what did you just hear? And then how does that impact your thinking on the enterprise as a whole? And you're beginning to go, So then around the table, hopefully the individual geniuses are coming out at a higher level, and you're beginning to create genius makers by going through and asking questions like that, instead of saying, Mark would go, okay, well, here's what I heard, here's what we're going to do. No, he's trying to pull out the answers from around the room so it looks a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's really good. We talked podcasts ago or so. We talked about having a point of view, and I thought when he does that, he's asking you to be prepared with a point of view, and that is a leader. I didn't have that in my thing here, but I think it really is a leader concept that everybody comes prepared with a point of view. I have one, and I'm going to share it. But just because I'm the head person, I want to hear what you. I don't know everything. What do you think?
That's right.
From your seat, Chris, what does it look like for the enterprise? And you may say something that Mark might just be blown away by. Think, I hadn't thought about that. But if you hadn't been prepared with a point of view, then you're just a follower waiting for him to tell you the point of view. Here's our point of view.
Yeah, let me give you an example. We put an event on as we're recording now. It was just last week, called Exchange. And by the way, it's the longest lasting thing that we do here at Maxwell Leadership. 22 years John's been doing this. Every year it's about 2.5 days, 3 days of leadership, conversations, content, but also experiences. And it's incredible if you want to grow. And so if you're interested, just go to the website, fill out the form. But we were having a conversation. Now, I have the privilege of leading a team that put this on. And so for 11 months, we planned this thing. We're at dinner. So the event starts on a Wednesday. We're at dinner on Monday night with one of the content pieces and speakers that we were with. And we were going to not only have that individual speak, but then we were going to experience something that evening. And so we're going through and we're talking about how we're going to engage the team and what does this look like and how should we do this. And we then at our level had already our mind made up, right? But at that dinner that night, there were a couple people on the team that were just part of the team that what I would just say are kind of the implementers for us on some of the ideas. And it's interesting because the speaker sat back and he said, hey, so-and-so, one of the implementers, how would you do it? What are we missing here? Okay, so this is Monday and we're started on Wednesday. And all of a sudden that individual's like, well, you know what we should do is we should do this. And I've seen that and I've seen that. And all of a sudden we all leaned in and we go, man, that's you have a point of view, right? We're pulling out your genius because you do these type of events and you're an implementer. And so that got pulled out and they had a voice. They had a voice. Her genius maker came out. You could tell she had developed herself in this area. And all of a sudden within 48 hours, we're now implementing something that she said as an idea because we were going around the table and being able to say, oh, you know what? Just because she's an implementer doesn't mean she's not a leader. She is leading, and we may have missed that at that point in time. So just a quick, small example that came to my mind as you were thinking about it, that I go, man, now, not only that, but then she was a little upset at us because then she had 48 hours to go buy some product and change everything for 150 people. But she pulled it off. And here's what I'll tell you. We do some incredible experiences, and at the end of the day, the two things that we added on that Monday night, people talked about that more than some of the other stuff that we did.
Well, that leads perfectly into point 3, which is says increase the share of voice. This is a phrase, can you increase the share of voice on your team? And what you gave is a perfect example of the person who was obviously considered the leader in a leader-follower model. The implementers would be the followers. The star of the show is going to be the leader, but this leader vectored into the leader model by saying, hey, what do you think?
100%.
And so what this is a Captain Marquet phrase, by the way. Captain Marquet said that it was all his voice when he goes into a meeting, when he's talking, and when I teach this, I use the picture of there's like a box in the middle of the room, and when you walk in, people expect you to step up and they step back. And I love this because I want to be the center of attention. My ego or whatever, I want, it's all my voice. And so I started calculating what was the share of voice in most of my meetings. 95% Perry, 5% somebody else. Then it becomes a challenge to say, how can I have the box in the room where I step back and the team steps up? And to me, this was, how do I increase the share of voice on the team? How do I make you have a point of view, insist that you come with a point of view, ask more questions, listen, be curious, get others talking about how should we solve this? You gave a perfect example. Hey, we got this thing. How would you do it? Increased share of voice goes across there right away. We teach on the generational leading different generations offering that we have now. And one of the things I picked up from there about, especially with younger generation, if you want to increase the share of voice, one thing we teach there is the describe, don't prescribe. And I love this.
Fantastic.
Is that I tend to, as a leader, I think most of us do, is we come in and say, here's the prescription, do this and this and this. And what we're learning with the younger generation is that don't prescribe it. Describe what you're thinking about, what's the outcome, and then ask them to come up with the prescription. So here's what I'm trying to accomplish. What do you think?
That's right.
How would you do that? And just what your talent did the other night. They said, instead of telling you, here's how we're going to do it, they said, well, that's what we're trying to accomplish. How would you do it? So he described, or she, I didn't even say who it was, but they described, they didn't prescribe how to do it, and I thought they came up with a better outcome.
I just had another thought that is a little bit of a paradigm shift. I was thinking about, we're doing a lot of work right now with sales teams. We have a content piece, influential selling. And oftentimes, and you have a lot of experience in sales, and I've led sales teams for a while, we go, hey, don't go in right away and give a prescription, before you diagnose what the problem is.
That's right.
Interesting thought maybe is to this, as we teach it, is it'd be interesting if you maybe even test it out and say, what if you describe what you do and then allow them to prescribe how that would help them? It's another way to go about the discovery. So
love it.
that didn't cost you any extra on this podcast. Just a thought. You can tell where my mind goes. I really was not listening to Perry. I was thinking, but I could hear him. All right. The fourth is empower your people. Empower is a big, big, big word. And people just say it. They throw it around. Again, I believe if you're throwing it around, it's probably more about delegating, because empowering is a lot of work, and you have to really be intentional about it, and you have to go about developing those people. And so this can include making sure they're in the right role. It can make sure that you are modeling the way and showing them what to do. We talk about this from a development standpoint, right? We say, hey, make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure they're with you, right? Then you're with them while they're doing it. Then they're doing it by themselves. You may be giving some feedback on the back end. And oh, by the way, then we want them to have somebody with them as they're doing it. So you have this loop of being able to empower and develop people, and that they have the right skills. Make sure we're equipping them to do that. And then most importantly to us is make sure that they have a development plan, right? Because you can empower somebody, and then if they don't continue to grow, it's not going to be effective long time. And so that's just a way to think about when it comes to, you got to make sure you're empowering your people if you want them to be leaders of leaders.
And then you do need to move, the delegation piece of that, about moving decision-making away from you out to the people that are empowered to do that. Then you're empowering them to be leaders. And that, followers just do what the leader says. Leader model says that I'm empowering you to lead, and of your own. You may not have the title. I may have the title, but you are acting as a leader. Finally, number 5, I just added here, was encourage innovation and creativity. And the leader model, the team should be bringing ideas for change. We have a new course piece that I just rolled out last week for the first time on leading through change. And one of the things I say there, who's responsible for seeing the change? And if you're in a leader-follower model, it's you, the leader. But if you're in a leader model, everyone on the team should be looking for opportunities to grow and improve. What is the continuous improvement? What is the next thing we need to be doing? How do we get better at that? What are the changes that are needed? So if you're the only change agent on the team, you're probably leading a leader-follower model and not the leader.
Well, this is incredible stuff for all of us to be listening to. And as I kind of wrap up my thoughts, I started off by saying this is relevant to me because people say, what are you trying to grow and develop in right now? And I am thinking about, how do I lead leaders? But it's convicting as well, because that means that maybe I haven't done a good enough job of leading my followers to become leaders, right? And so it is a little bit of a mindset shift. And so if you're listening to us and you go, man, I got an incredible team, you got to begin thinking about, are they leaders? Am I leading them like they're leaders, or am I leading them and expecting them just to be followers? And so Perry kind of walks us through 5 things right here that will allow you to kind of change that mindset shift. And when you do that, then you'll get to the point to where maybe you don't ever get to the point where I go, how do I lead leaders versus leading followers? You shouldn't have to ask that question. And so I appreciate the content as we wrap up today, because it was convicting to me. But if we lead from the right standpoint from the get-go, you may never even have to ask that question that I've been leading for over 20 years, and now I'm asking myself that question.
Fantastic.
I'm so glad, as I said earlier, to be in the studio with you. I love this quote just to kind of start us out today. I really don't even know who to attribute it to, but it says, "The best teachers show you where to look without telling you what to see."
That's awesome.
And isn't that true? I mean,
Yeah.
think about, for you and I think about somebody that was a teacher or a facilitator in our life.
Yeah.
It was what they showed us as much as what they told us.
Yeah.
And I love this lesson from John. I love digging into it and getting ready to go with you.
What I love about that, first of all, thanks for having me back. I know in the intro you said it had been a little while. I hadn't received an invite from Jake in some time, and so I wanted to talk to you about that.
You're
but
back on trial.
But I'm back.
You're back on
I'm
trial.
back. I don't know who didn't show up today, but I'm here to help you out. What I love about that is a statement of, teaching people is bringing the best out in them. And in that quote right there, you're driving curiosity in your people to get them to go look and to search versus telling them, and you're facilitating that growth in them in order to bring the best out.
So quick story on that. Again, it's Miss Richardson, for my third grade teacher. And she really served as a facilitator, but I remember her, and I don't remember what she taught me. I think I learned my multiplication tables back then, maybe. I think it may have been third, fourth, or fifth. But she taught me, I'm sure, how to read. But she taught me how to feel. She always told me, she says, "You remind me of my son. You remind me of somebody very dear to me." And what she was really, Miss Richardson was really showing me was the best way to be a student in her class was to feel like a family member. And I learned so much that particular year. And again, think about the people in our life that has taught us or facilitated a lesson or a thought in our life. It all comes back to that point. They show us, they let us dig into it and find it more than they teach us.
And as leaders, one of the things we're looking for is not only to drive our curiosity and engagement, but to drive the engagement of those that are under our leadership, under our influence, whatever that might look like in your world. And so that's such a big driving factor when you talk to leaders is, how do I get my team more engaged? And what I love about where John is going with this is that we can be great leaders, but we need to be really, really, really good, great teachers in order to drive that engagement level. And so what I want to do is I want to just pick your brain for a minute. And I want you to share also a little bit about what you do in regards to the team. So as I was listening to John's message and we were preparing ahead of time, the first thing that came to mind under point number one, where John talks about it's not about you, it's about them, is you meet with our leadership team, your direct reports. On a monthly basis. You meet with us more than that, but on a monthly basis to really just cast the vision for the organization and talk about what's going on. But before we do any business, you spend 15, 20, depending if you're on a roll, 30, 45 minutes.
Keep going.
But you spend time just teaching us. And it's not about what you're learning or what you need to know. It's about what you have learned over the last 30 days that you think would add value to us, that you think would learn, that would help us as we learn. And so you spend time facilitating a conversation. It's interactive at times. Sometimes you're just teaching us. Talk about why you do that. And as long as I've known you, you've been doing that. Talk about why you do it, where maybe you learned it from, and then how you go about that and how you decide what it is that you want to facilitate or teach us so that it adds value to us as your direct reports in the room.
Well, I think it comes back to a real appreciation for any nugget that I get. I teach a lesson, a discovery, an enlightenment as a gold nugget. Because I do believe that if you shine it off, if you put it in your pocket, if you put it into your being, into your leadership, and you begin to use it, that consistency of use on that nugget is the thing that compounds influence in your life.
That's good.
Believe that with all of my heart. So it comes from a fundamental foundation that every podcast, and I'm looking right now to those of you that are tuning in to YouTube, every podcast, no matter how Southern, how don't and doesn't, and my contradictions contradict one another, I'm going to tell you, in every podcast, there is a nugget for you. It's the belief, Chris, that every message on a Sunday morning or every moment with John or every chance I get with a mentor or a facilitator in my life, there is something that's going to be deposited into me that with intentionality will give me great reward.
Yeah.
Great return. So, number one, you start there. Every moment, every lesson, everything that you are given is worth something if you will begin to use it. The second thing I would say, it really comes from hearing John teach about ACT all of our life.
Yeah.
Everything should have an application, apply, A. Everything should have something that you can change or do something a little bit better, a little bit different in your life. And everything should be given to you so that you can train or teach others the T.
Yeah.
So when I have a lesson, I believe that the lesson is, number one, meant to be taught in some frame of reference. So I walk into every leadership meeting and I go, what have I learned lately that I am responsible to give to my leadership team? What have I learned lately? I've got some upcoming leadership meetings that's coming up soon. I already know the thoughts that I've just picked up recently that are intended, yes, for my betterment, but are intended so that I can share with others and see them improve too. And when you have those two fundamental philosophies in life, everything has something that is able to be mined, to be captured, to make better your life. And everything that you give is meant to be given to somebody else.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I walk into every leadership meeting and I am thinking, what have I learned recently that should be transferred into this environment that I'm walking into?
And what I love about what you do with that is you process and you begin thinking about those nuggets, and then you transfer them into what is it that they need? Where is the team now? How do I take what I'm learning and make it very practical and applicable to where the team is as a whole? And it may be the entire team, or maybe certain team members, but you come in with that and you're already thinking about it for our next meeting. It could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, doesn't matter. You're already there and you're beginning to do that. And here's what that does for us as a receiver of that information. I read this statistic the other day that talked about when you teach, when you facilitate, when you develop your people, they are just organically going to be 17% more productive.
Wow.
Because you're doing that. And I think the beginning of those meetings, when you spend time doing that investment of time is showing up in a return on when we walk out of there. We are more inspired. We're more engaged. We want to enhance our productivity. We're buying in. And so I think this is, when John talks about this, I think this is just such a great point to make sure that we are teaching not just what we're learning, but what we're learning and how it applies to the leadership team.
And I want to say one more thing. I absolutely give it just to enrich your life, or to enrich the personalities, the people in each of the meetings. But on days that I am most effective with that, I'm able to attach it to the rest of the meeting agenda so that we can have corporate application to it as well.
That's good.
So it is absolutely an intent. I've been enriched. I'm better. Let me enrich and better others. But it also, on the days that I'm good, I'm better, I'm more successful, is the days that I can give team or corporate application to that too. So in a lot of ways, I'm just a facilitator of that content to make it make sense for the individual, but then to make it productive for the team as a whole in the agenda.
Which benefits them.
That's right.
Both of them benefits them. And so I am a receiver of that. And so listeners, as you're listening, or if you're watching us on YouTube, I want to encourage you to think about finding nuggets that you're learning and then finding opportunities to teach or facilitate that content to those that you have the privilege of leading, of influencing. Because our favorite statement around here, everyone deserves to be led well. Yeah. This is the key to start with when it comes to leading the people. And, John talks a lot about at level 2 influence in the 5 levels about connecting and building relationships with people. And I think when you add value to people, when you teach them like you do to us, we immediately get connected to you. We get connected to you. We get connected to the people that are in the room. And so the power of this lesson is so strong. Just this first point, and we got 3 more to go. Yeah. But just this first point as a leader is something you need to be paying attention to.
Hey, don't let everybody, people listening to the podcast, don't let anybody scare you. I didn't say this in my opening notes. This is part 1, so we won't do 3 today.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
we'll just do 1. Some of you were looking at your clock saying, my workout's about over.
We just lost all of our listeners. We saw just a drastic drop at this mark. So, all right, the next point I want to talk about is point 2. And you have sat with John, and I've been a privilege to learn from John and from you at this, where it talks about studying your students. Mm-hmm. and talk about, as you've learned and been mentored from John as a leader, when you're getting ready to go speak, when you're getting ready to go teach, when you're getting ready to go facilitate, what goes through your mind? How do you begin to understand and study the students so that what you're delivering is very impactful to them and where they're at?
Give me. I just talked about time. Now, give me a few minutes to build this out, okay, Chris? I'm going to build it out on the personal level, like you just asked me, but I'm also going to build it out on my business model. And podcast listeners, I believe your business model. And so, first, let me say on a personal level, I remember I was with John. John tells this story now publicly all around the world. I was with John when he was getting ready to speak to about 8,000 people. It was about 7,900 to be exact. And a young kid came up to him, flashy, a really good guy that John and I actually were going to stay after. We had changed our plane, we'd changed our flight schedule, all of that stuff to stay and listen to this incredible up-and-coming, rising communicator. And he came up to John with full of zest and energy, and he said, "John, can I just get in your head for a minute?" And, there was a little over-the-top kind of emotion, so I kind of perked up. And John said, "Sure, anything I can help you." And he said, "What are you thinking about right now?" Now, John was going on stage in 2 minutes, and John went, "I'm thinking about the people." And he said, "The people?" He said, "You're not thinking about your opening act, what you're going to say, how you're going to place your hands?" And John said, "No." He said, "You're not thinking about your content?" John said, "No." John said, "I'm thinking about the people." He said, "I've already thought about my content. In some cases, I've been thinking about my content for 20, 30 years. I'm thinking about the people and where are they and what is their posture and how am I going to help them?" And it struck me, and now John teaches that with great efficiency and great poignancy when he goes, when you walk on stage, you shouldn't be thinking about content. You should be thinking about the people. Now, John illustrates that later on in this point, and please go back and listen if you got it. I'm not going to repeat John. But you should not be preparing your content right before you go on stage. That should have already been done.
Right.
You should be preparing your connectivity quotient. How and what is connection with this audience going to look like? Let me talk about our business plan.
Yeah.
Several years ago, in fact, it was 40 years ago, John was challenged by Les Parrott and said, "John, you need to write a book." "John, I don't want to write a book. I don't want to be an author." And he said, "You will be able to impact people with your written word that you never was able to if you don't write a book." Well, that struck John's fancy. John was not interested in writing books. And so 40 years ago, John began writing a book so that he would be able to help people he would never meet. Well, 87 books later, 36 million pairs of hands have held a John Maxwell book. I think it was a good strategy.
Yeah.
Just like that, Chris, we began realizing that if we really wanted to make an impact in companies, in teams, we were going to have to partner with people to make them empowered and effective to where they could impact people in places we would never go as a business strategy. And so we started this initiative that really it's all about facilitating. It's empowering women and men in an environment where they like that environment, but they want to see that environment better.
Yeah.
And they want to see their influence in that environment grow.
Yeah.
They want the environment better. They want their influence in that environment to grow. Okay. Now, already some of you are going, "Yeah, that's me. That's me. I need my environment better, and I want my influence to grow." And so John and I began, in fact, let me distance myself. John started before me realizing that there was a strategy that we should employ on how to empower people in a team, in a company that wanted to see the company, the people in the company better, and wanted to see their influence increased. So we started programs to help facilitators. That's what we call them. Yeah. That's an internal language. Don't let that scare you. We started a program that would allow people to be facilitators, that would take content, we would train them, we would equip them, they would take that content, and then they would better the people in that environment. It sounds a little bit like our opening line at the podcast, right? We add value to people. Yeah. Let me say it differently. We add value to facilitators so that the facilitators will multiply value to others. And I just want to take a moment right here. This is off script, so just give me a moment, Chris. And I want to talk a little bit about this facilitation, because number one, you work with facilitators in some of the best companies in the world, the most respected companies in their industry. You work with people in those companies that are facilitators.
Yeah.
And I want you to, one, go off script a little bit,
Okay.
although it's right on script. And I want you to talk a little bit about the power of facilitation that you see in our corporate relationships on corporate teams in corporate environments.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I get the privilege to ride shotgun with some of our excellent executive facilitators, but then also organizations that have facilitators that are on their learning and development teams, and we just come alongside and help them. I think what's so powerful about what John thought about a long time ago and then you've helped implement is when you become a teacher, when you become a facilitator of content, it inspires trust within those people. And we talked a little bit about how it connects you with people. But so many organizations right now are losing people out the back door, good team members, because it's shifting a little bit about what's important to them. I was reading the other day, I think it was a Harvard Business Review article where just on U.S. businesses, and I know we have an international audience, and that number's unfortunately going to be bigger if we looked at it from international. But I was reading the other day, and it talked about how there's so much voluntarily leaving because around not alignment and purpose, but more importantly, not developing them, not teaching them, not facilitating content to them, that it's costing U.S. businesses over $650 billion dollars annually. And that just breaks your heart. It breaks my heart. It breaks John's heart, because we want to be able to add value to people. And if leaders would be able to do that, even from a facilitation standpoint, it would drastically change your organization, increase the productivity. It would enhance the culture inside the organization. So we said, hey, we've got to figure this out. Sure. And so one of the things that we love doing is that we provide content through John's principles, and we help create facilitation techniques and teaching techniques. And back to point number 2, how do you learn about those that are going to be in your room, your students, before they get in there? How do you go about that so that when you do teach them, you're able to connect with them? And so now we have the privilege of not only working with our facilitators and facilitator in an organization, but with people that have a desire that are in organizations right now or their communities that want to facilitate content to improve the culture, improve their lives, to add value to them. We provide the content. We help them with facilitation and teaching techniques. What do you do before? What do you do during? What do you do after?
Awesome.
All of that.
Awesome. And, let me put it out there in podcast land, because you think it's been a long time since Chris Scottie's been here since the last time. It's going to be a long time perhaps again.
Yeah.
Because my goal, the vision that I've put out in front of our team, is I want 25,000 companies around the world to have a Maxwell facilitator in that company. Somebody that knows how to, with tools, resources, with support, knows how to make the company better, make the people in the company better, and wants to grow their influence in that organization. And so here's what I'd love to do, Chris, and we'll put this in the show notes. I'll mention it at the end of the show as well. Go to maxwellpodcast.com/facilitator. maxwellpodcast.com/facilitator, and you'll be able to get a lot more information. Some of you are ready now. Some of you want to gather the information, go back to your company and see if they will sponsor you, be a part of this, if they'll catch the vision. But we're looking for champions. Yeah. And again, it goes back to this point that you've got to study your students. So many of us that are executives, Chris, you're an executive, I'm an executive in a growing company. We lose touch with our people. And yet facilitators seem to know where the people are and facilitate. And that's kind of how John wraps the second point up, is you got to know where your people are rather than expecting your people to come to you. One of the ways to know your people is to get facilitators down into the lifeblood of the organization, which will be closer to the pulse.
One of the things, as we kind of wrap up today, and you can hear our passion about this and adding value to people to be able to teach and facilitate others. When I think back about some of the greatest teachers that I've ever had, you mentioned your third grade teacher, they really facilitated our learning.
That's right.
And I think each one of you that are listening, maybe watching us today, you can think about, if I ask you that question, what teacher, what facilitator had the greatest impact on you? There are probably multiple people that come to mind. And our desire is to help you get there for somebody someday to look at it and go, hey, man, Mark Cole, he was that teacher. He was that facilitator. as you wrap up, I know one of the things you do about under point number 2 about studying your students is you spend time every week, which we sometimes challenge you on this as the CEO. We're like, Mark, every week. But you really go and listen to our facilitators, to our people, and you hear from them. You learn what are the content pieces that we need to be developing in order to serve them well in the field and where they're at and where they're struggling. All these. Talk a little bit about the power of that in regards to you as a leader inside our organization to be able to provide more information for them.
Well, it goes with this standout statement that I want to make sure that you get from this lesson, and it's touch a heart before you ask for a hand. We've heard John say that. But facilitation, connecting with I'm no more than a facilitator every week when you in this environment to where I reach out to our speakers, our trainers, our coaches, our facilitators. I'm no more than a facilitator at that point. Now, some people call me the CEO. Some people call me the visionary. But in that environment, I'm just a facilitator. I'm just trying to understand. And here's what happens as a facilitator. I love this reciprocal impact that happens. I come with a lesson. But by the time I'm done, not only from the lesson that I've studied, prayer, it's helped me, but from the interaction, I, as the facilitator, began to grow and expand in that environment as well. John says that true leaders, he said this in the lesson today, true leaders go find the people, not expect the people to come find them. And one of my greatest experiences was 6 years ago when I decided to become a facilitator in our own environment. Now I've facilitated outside. I've worked with clients. I've done all that stuff. I grew up in the organization. Remember, I've kind of done it all. But that day that in my positional leadership, I was a positional leader at that time. I was the CEO. And 6 years ago, I said, you know what? I'm going to dedicate every Tuesday to facilitation. I'm going to be a facilitator every Tuesday. Chris, 3 weeks into that commitment, 3 weeks in, was the most liberating thing that I've ever had as a leader. See, I thought, this is such a Lone Ranger statement, I thought I was the only one that had passion for John's legacy and our future because I'd been here for, at that point, 18 years. And I've fired up and I'm all in, and I've had these spiritual experiences that I've shared on this podcast of I knew I was called to availability and proximity to John. I get on this call and I get into the lifeblood of the organization through facilitation, and I find out the greatest discovery. There were people throughout the entire organization that had just as much passion for our vision, our legacy, and our sustainability than I had. Now, that was a hard pill for me to take at first because I wore my badge with pride. And then I realized there was no badge. I was just a part of a huge community. I went to where the people were, and where the people were was exactly where I wanted them to be. And I kept thinking I had to get them through inspiration and motivation and instruction. And yet, really all I needed to do is to get in proximity, which is what facilitation does. You get into proximity and you find out where your people are. And for me, I've done it recently. I shared in the last few weeks about some recent family rooms that I did. That was all an intent to go to where the people are. And if there's one great takeaway from our lesson today that John's teaching us, and we'll be back next week for part 2, if I can get Chris to show up again. That's a little jury's out on that. But great leaders are great teachers. And what John's really saying is positional leaders are best when they come in and get connected at the same level with the people that they're trying to lead. And I love that. Hey, I want to again remind you, touch a heart before you ask for a hand.
Today, I want to talk to you about one of the attributes and contributions that leaders give other people, and that's what makes leadership so important. I would like to talk to you about the fact that leaders lift others. In other words, wherever you see a leader, the people around that leader will always go to higher ground. My friend Johnny Cash, in our time of mentoring and just talking together, constantly brings up to me in my mentoring time with him, John, I have a great desire to help other people, and I want to make their lives better for them. And he works really hard at that. And it's one of the things I greatly appreciate about him. Every time I look into his heart is to lift up other leaders. Now, we've heard the expression that it's lonely at the top. But I've always said that a good leader never says that, because think about it for a moment. If you're at the top all by yourself, you didn't lift anybody. You didn't bring anybody to the top with you. In fact, if you're only at the top by yourself, you're really not a leader. Honestly, you're just a hiker. Leaders lift other people. Recently, I was doing a lesson on fulfillment, because there are so many people, instead of living a fulfilling life, they lead and live an empty life. And I was trying to distinguish the difference between what is emptiness in a person's life and what makes them feel empty, and what is fulfilling in a person's life and what brings great joy and fulfillment to them. In that lesson, I was talking about that people that live a fulfilling life, they value people and they add value to those people. Now, that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying lifting others. If you as a leader value people and you add value to people, trust me, my friend, without any doubt, you will lift other people. I have spent my life doing that exact thing. In fact, the other day I had someone come and ask me, they said, a little bit about your journey. How did this happen that you began to be what I would call a leader that lifted other people? Well, honestly, at 75, it's easy for me to understand my life as I look backwards. It was Steve Jobs who said, when we look forward, it's hard to connect the dots. But when we look backwards, then it just is kind of natural to see how things just fell in place. In my life, back in 1973, I went to a convention in Waterloo, Iowa, and I heard Charles Tremendous Jones, and he said that I would be the same person I was in 5 years unless I met new people and I read more books. In other words, Charles Tremendous Jones said to me that the people I associate with and the books that I read are going to determine how successful I will be in life. And from that very moment, I determined that I was going to be around great people and I was going to help people become great. I've often said that when you have a great dream and you have a great team, then all of a sudden you can realize everything that you want to accomplish. Now, I've known those who had a big dream and a bad team, and that's a nightmare. So how did I lift up people? How do you lift up others as leaders? I'm going to share with you now some material, some thoughts that really I've never shared with other people before. This is for you. This is for your training. This is for your growth. This is for your development. This is to help you to be a leader that lifts up other people. So how do we do this? How do I lift others? How do you lift others? Number one, I think to lift other people, it starts with you. I think you have to have a desire to become great. You have to have a desire inside of you to do great things. I can still remember as a very young leader in my 20s, I came to the conclusion that I wanted to make a difference. I really did. That I wanted to make a difference in my life. I wanted to make a difference in your life. I wanted to make a difference in the people's lives around me. And I had this desire. It was a passion of mine. Napoleon Hill said, the starting point of all achievement is desire. I believe that with all of my heart. I have found that great people, great leaders, you don't have to motivate them. You don't have to say, hey, get up, get out of bed, get into the game. They already have that passion. They already have that desire. And I did. And so because I had this great desire, this desire to be great, I went to one of my mentors. His name was Elmer. I call him affectionately E.T. He's still alive. He's older than me. He's 90 years old. But he has been a friend and a mentor for many, many years of my life. And so I'm very, very young. I'm in my 20s. And I go to E.T. and I ask him, how do I become great? What he said to me that day was life-changing. And for, 50 years of my life, I've been following those words. Here's what he said. If you want to become great, go to great events. Seek out great people. Ask great questions. Read great books. Find great mentors. And then he said, above all, attempt to do great things. When E.T. told me that 50 years ago, I marked those words. I said, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to great events. I'm going to seek out great people. I'm going to ask great questions. I'm going to read great books. I'm going to find great mentors in my life, and I'm going to attempt to do great things. If you want to lift others, the first thing you want to do is just have a desire inside of you to be great. The second characteristic I think that you need to possess is you need to do what my mentor Elmer Towns told me to do as a very young leader. Go to where great people go. Wow. I have discovered that this is the secret to having a faster pace on my success journey. My mama used to talk to me and say, John, birds of a feather flock together. Average people hang with average people. People that are successful hang with people that are successful. My father knew that. And as I was growing up, he took time to introduce me to great people. Wow. I was in the 7th grade when he took me to meet his long-distance mentor himself, Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote the great book, The Power of Positive Thinking. In Columbus, Ohio, 7th grader, I met Norman Vincent Peale. When I was in the 11th grade, I met E. Stanley Jones, another great man, a great missionary, a friend of Gandhi's, a man that influenced the world, a great writer. Elmer Towns, my mentor, said and taught me at a young age what he called the hot poker principle. The hot poker principle is just very simple. If you have a fire in the fireplace, if you put the poker in the fire or by the fire, it's only a matter of time till it gets hot. If you remove the poker away from the fire, it's only a matter of time till it gets cold. And Elmer said, John, get around hot people, get around great people so you can stay hot, so you can stay passionate. That's exactly what I have done. When I was in my late 20s, I wrote a lesson that has been life-changing for many people about how to create a growth environment. In it, I just simply say, listen carefully, a growth environment is a place where others are ahead of you, where you're continually challenged, where your focus is forward, where the atmosphere is affirming, where you're often out of your comfort zone, where you wake up excited, where failure is not your enemy, where others are growing, where people desire change, and where growth is modeled and expected. Those are the 10 things that make a great growth environment. The other day, when I was preparing this lesson for you, I was looking at those characteristics of a growth environment, and all of a sudden it hit me. 5 of the 10 very essential items to have a growth environment in your life are having great people around you. Others are ahead of you. The atmosphere is affirming. Others are growing. People desire change. Growth is modeled and expected. 5 out of the 10 are specifically about great people. Mark Cole, the CEO of my companies, calls it the power of proximity. He talks about the fact that if you really want to do something great, you've got to be around great people because there is a contagiousness that happens when you're around those type of people. And so I've looked at myself and I've asked myself many times, how did I become great? And I'd have to say, without any doubt, I not only had a desire to be great, but I put myself around great people. And again, that's what's so exciting to me about this program, because you're in these lessons, you're going to be exposed to great people who have great ideas and great thinking that can really help you to become great. In my early years, when I was very young, inexperienced, and not known at all as a leader, my mentors were my books. Back then, we didn't have all the incredible technology that you have today. but I was mentored from afar by books or by tapes that I could listen to. So, if you really want to lift others up, you have to have a desire to be great, and you have to go where the great people go. Where are the great people? Thirdly, if you really want to be great and be a leader that can lift others, you have to do what great people do. Again, many times we look at great people and we say, wow, I would like to have that title. I'd like to have that position. I'd like to have that money. I'd like to have that influence. And we don't realize that all those things that we want are a result of what great people do every day. The things that we don't even see, the behind the scenes, the hidden disciplines that keep people doing the great things every day so that their greatness shows when they're out in public. A book that I grew up on and was mentored on was Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And when people talk to me about doing what great people do, I say, go to that book. And I would suggest you need, if you haven't, you need to read that book. And if you have read the book, you need to practice the 7 habits that Stephen Covey talks about, the things that you have to do to be great. What did he say? He said, number 1, be proactive. In other words, take action. There is no success, none, without action. Nobody ever reflected their way to success. Nobody ever thought their way to success. Nobody ever hoped their way to success. No one with good intentions ever had success. It takes action. Action is always associated with success. Be proactive. Number 2, begin with the end in mind. This is all about intentionality. This is all about seeing the big picture. This is all about don't do something stupid today that'll mess up the long-term journey of your life. Everything that you do, look at your dream, look at your goal, do everything with the end in mind. The third thing that Stephen Covey suggests that we do is to put first things first. In other words, prioritize your life. All leaders know activity is not necessarily accomplishment. I know a lot of busy, hardworking people that are not successful at all. So what we have to do is we have to say, what's the most important? Put first things first. Don't put first things last. Hey, put last things last. Put first things first. Number 4, Stephen Covey says, think win-win. I have lived my life following that principle. If I'm going to work with you, I'm going to ask myself a simple question. What is the win for you and what's the win for me? I never get into any relationship where I win and you're going to lose. Or I'm not going to get in a relationship where you're going to win and I'm going to lose. No, I'm going to get into a relationship where together we both are better. Together, we both win. The fifth thing that Stephen Covey talked about that was so effective is he said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. He talked about listening. He talked about caring for people in such a way that you allow them to tell their story. And you listen and care and are attentively drawing their story out. In other words, if I understand you well, you'll have a desire, because I listen and care, to understand me. But I must, again, as a leader, I must go first. So many times leaders, they just want to be understood. They want to make sure that they got their vision out, they got their directions out, and it's kind of, now listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. But if you really want to lift others and you really want to grow in this area, you don't start with yourself. You start with your people and say, okay, tell me your story. What are your dreams? What is it in your life that you would really like to do that would make a difference in people's life? I love those words. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. The sixth thing that Stephen Covey talks about that is so important for us to, again, be leaders who do what great people do is he talks about synergizing. And if you really read the chapter, it's really about teamwork. It's about coming together. It's what Mother Teresa said when she said, you can do things I cannot do. I can do things you cannot do, and together we can do great things. Synergizing means that we come together as a team. One is too small of a number to achieve greatness. When we synergize, we lead people in a desired vision, but we do it together as a team. The last thing that Stephen Covey said is sharpen the saw. In other words, develop yourself personally. When he said sharpen the saw, he's talking about cutting down trees, and you all know that if I don't stop long enough to sharpen the saw, if it's not the best instrument I can possibly use to cut that lumber, it's not going to cut very well. And so we have to constantly keep sharp. We have to constantly grow. We have to constantly learn. We have to constantly improve our life. Okay, we're talking about how do we become leaders that lift others? And we've talked about so far three things. We've talked about how important it is for us to have a desire to be great. We have talked about go where great people go, and then do what great people do. Now I'm going to talk to you about number 4. Be unforgettable. Be unforgettable. My friend Jack Welch used to talk about getting out of the people pile. You see, in every organization, there are just a lot of people. So how do you and I distinguish ourselves? I mean, how do we get out of the people pile until they see us and they notice us? And what I want to share with you today is something that's very important, and it's just life-changing. If you want to get out of the people pile, just commit your life to living a life beyond expectations. I want you to exceed expectations. I want you to set your bar, your personal bar, your productivity bar, your life conduct bar. I want you to set it high. You see, only 15% of the people in life even meet expectations. So this people pile, it's just got a whole bunch of people that are just average. And 15% exceed expectations or meet expectations. And of those 15% that meet expectations, only 2% exceed expectations. So I want to encourage you in your life to live a life that says, I exceed the expectations of other people around me. In fact, the way I look at it is this. When I'm getting ready to speak for a company, I do a pre-conference call, and one of the questions I ask them is, what are your expectations of me? What do you want to see happen when I come and speak for you? And they tell me, and I write it down. Now, when they give that to me, I look at what I wrote down, and those expectations they have of me, that's not my ceiling. That's my floor. I stand on that. I make sure that's going to be done. Now I ask myself the question, how am I going to exceed expectations? How am I going to be so unforgettable that I'm irreplaceable? And they look and they say, I got to have John back because he truly does make a difference in my life. How am I going to do that? Let's review just for a second. For me to be a leader that can lift other people, I have to have a great desire to be great. I have to go where great people go, do what great people do. I have to be unforgettable, exceed those expectations. And number 5, I have to be greater on the inside than I am on the outside. Wow, this is huge. You see, when we look at successful people, what we normally do is we see what they have accomplished, the tangible things on the outside. But I am here to tell you that greatness begins on the inside first. My wonderful friend, Truett Cathy, was the founder of Chick-fil-A, this incredible, best company to work for in America restaurant chain. When Chick-fil-A was just kind of starting to get momentum, the people around him said, we need to get bigger, we need to get bigger. And Truett Cathy said, no. He said, we need to get better. He said, when we get better, when we improve ourselves, when we get better, the people, the customers, the clients, they'll insist that we get bigger. Our job is to be big on the inside. Our job is to be greater on the inside than we are on the outside. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that I'll be different than most people. For example, many people live a life of scarcity. I live a life of abundance. Most people, in relationships with others, they either take the low road or the middle road. They either kind of, well, if you'll treat me good, I treat you good. You treat me bad, I'll treat you bad. I take the high road. You see, I take the road where if you treat me bad, I'll still treat you good. I will always be bigger in my spirit and my attitude than you. Trust me. I was talking about high road the other day, and a person came up to me at the conference and said, the high road is a toll road, but the price is worth it. When they said that to me, I thought how true that is. I am always going to treat people better than they treat me. I'm always going to live a life of abundance, not scarcity. And I'm going to choose sowing over reaping. I'm always going to sow seeds of goodness into people's life. You see, most people, they get up and they look at life from that day and they say, I wonder what life is going to bring to me today. I wonder what it's going to give me. I wonder what I'm going to get out of life. That's how they think. I never think about reaping. I always think about sowing. In fact, the success of my day is determined by the seeds I sow, not by the harvest that I want to reap. So I'm going to constantly do more for others than they do for myself. I'm going to constantly be greater on the inside than I'm on the outside. Now I'm preparing you. All the things I've given you, I'm preparing you to lift other people. So number 6, live out your great vision. Now, what I mean by living out your great vision, it's one thing to tell others about your vision, but it's another thing to show others your vision. When I tell you my vision, I'm a vision caster. But when I show you my vision, I become a vision character. And when I can show and tell my vision, I become what I call a vision champion. And great people are attracted by great success. So my credibility as a leader isn't what I say I can do, it's what I actually do. So what I do is I bring people with me, the people that I'm mentoring, the people that I'm leading and lifting. I take them with me. I take them with me to have leadership experiences. I say, come and be with me and watch this and observe this. This begins absolutely life-changing. When a person sees the vision that you have created, they buy into it so quickly because now they get to be a participant of that vision. Now I get to the very essence of this lesson. If you want to lift others, you've got to develop great people. When people ask me at 75, what is the number one reason for my success? It's very obvious. I have developed great people in my life. And there are 2 principles for developing great people. And those 2 principles are, number 1, growth requires people development. I have to spend time developing people. Growing organizations grow people. So growing leaders is at the top of my agenda. And personal development, my own personal growth, precedes the development of others.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.